He had not done anything wrong. He had not been loud. He had not caused any disruption. He had simply walked in through the door, found a seat at the counter the way any person walks into any restaurant and finds a seat, and ordered a cup of tea and a small plate of food because he was hungry and this was a place that sold food. That was all. But the manager had come over within 3 minutes and had spoken to him in the specific tone that people use when they have decided that a person does not belong in a space and want to communicate this decision without saying it directly. She had said they were expecting a reservation. She had said the seat he was in was needed. She had said it would be better if he found somewhere else. He had looked at the empty restaurant around him, the 20 tables with no one at them, the counter with 3 empty stools on either side of his, and he had understood exactly what she was saying and what she was not saying, and he had picked up his bag and he had left. He stood on the pavement outside and he had been on that pavement for less than 4 minutes when the door of the restaurant opened again and a man came out. Not the manager. A different man. A man who had been sitting at a corner table when the scene at the counter happened and who had watched it with the full attention of someone who has decided that what they are watching requires a response. He had come outside and he had said something to the man on the pavement that neither of them could have anticipated. And what happened in the next hour changed both of their lives in ways that neither of them had prepared for. Stay with me. Because what was taken from one man at a restaurant counter was nothing compared to what was given back on the pavement 4 minutes later. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. His name was Emeka Udo and he was 31 years old, and he was having the kind of day that people have when every small thing that can go wrong has gone wrong, in the specific accumulating way that small things accumulate when the universe has decided that today is not going to give you anything easily. He had woken that morning at 5:30 because his alarm had not gone off and the bus he needed for the 7 o'clock interview had left without him, and the next bus had been 40 minutes late, and the interview, which had been for a position that he had been preparing for across 2 weeks of evenings and weekends, had proceeded without him because 40 minutes late was 40 minutes too late for the kind of company that considered punctuality a direct expression of professional character. He had arrived at the building to be told by the receptionist with the specific polite regret of someone delivering bad news they have delivered many times that the interview slot had been given to the next candidate and that the company would be in touch if they wished to reschedule. They had not called. He had spent the rest of the morning and early afternoon in the city doing the things that people who are between employment do in the city, applying for things through his phone, making calls, sending emails, managing the specific combination of hope and practical urgency that defined his daily life at this point. He had been between employment for 4 months. He had been a junior accountant at a logistics company that had gone through a round of redundancies in which he, as one of the more recently hired members of the finance team, had been among the first to go. The redundancy had been handled correctly in terms of the documentation and the final settlement, and entirely incorrectly in terms of the human texture of how it had been communicated, which was to say it had been communicated in the way that companies communicate these things when efficiency is the priority and the feelings of the people receiving the communication are considered a secondary concern. He had left the logistics company on a Friday afternoon with a box of his desk items and the specific shock of someone who had understood intellectually that these things happened and who had not been fully prepared for the experience of it happening to him. The 4 months since had been the 4 months of someone who was managing a situation that required management while also carrying the interior weight of what the situation meant, the daily work of applying and interviewing and following up and being followed up with, and the background condition of the financial clock that ticked through every day in the specific way of someone who knows what their savings can cover and for how long, and who is tracking the distance between where they are and the point where the numbers stop working. He was 3 weeks from the point where the numbers stopped working. He had been to 11 interviews. He had received 3 final round invitations and 0 offers. The morning's missed interview had been the 4th final round, and it had not produced a second chance. He was hungry. He had not eaten since the previous evening, and the morning and afternoon of the day had not produced either the time or the money for food. He had 250 naira in his wallet, which was the money he had reserved for today's bus fares before the morning's complications had redirected the day's expenses. He had used most of it on the buses. He calculated as he walked along the street that ran past a row of restaurants and food places, approximately 140 naira remaining, which was enough for tea and something small at the kind of place that served tea and something small. He was on this street by the logic of having walked in the direction that his feet took him when the afternoon had produced no further useful activity and hunger had become the most pressing fact of his immediate situation. He saw the restaurant. He saw through the glass that it was not full. He went inside. The restaurant was the kind of place that occupied the territory between the expensive and the ordinary, the territory where the prices were above the ordinary without being fully in the expensive category and where the quality was intended to justify the difference. It had about 20 tables and a counter along the left wall with 6 stools, all empty. There were perhaps 4 tables occupied. He sat at the counter. He had been sitting for perhaps 90 seconds when the waiter came and he had been about to order when the manager appeared from the back of the restaurant. Her name was Mrs. Kemi and she was the manager and part owner of the restaurant and she had specific ideas about the kind of establishment she was running and the kind of customers it was for. She was not an unkind woman in her domestic life. She was a woman who had invested significantly in creating a particular kind of space and who had developed, over the years of running the space, a specific and not entirely conscious habit of making rapid assessments of the people who entered it and deciding quickly whether they matched the space's intended clientele. Emeka, in his clothes that were professional but that had the specific quality of professional clothes that have been worn frequently during a period when replacing them has not been financially possible, carrying a bag that had seen better years, with the particular manner of someone who has been navigating difficulty for 4 months and has learned to carry it as quietly as possible, had not passed her rapid assessment. She came to the counter. She said good afternoon. He said good afternoon. She said they were expecting a reservation shortly and the counter seats were reserved. He looked at the empty counter. He looked at the empty restaurant. He looked at her. He said of course. He picked up his bag. He walked to the door. He went outside. He stood on the pavement in the afternoon sun and felt the full dimension of what had just happened with the complete honesty of someone who does not allow themselves the comfort of managed versions of difficult information. He had been asked to leave a restaurant he had not been able to afford anyway because he looked like someone who could not afford it. He stood on the pavement and he was hungry and he had 140 naira and it was 4 months into a situation that was 3 weeks from becoming something else and the morning had produced nothing useful and the afternoon had produced nothing useful and now the pavement. He was still standing on the pavement when the door of the restaurant opened. He turned, expecting the manager, prepared to say something civil and move on. The man who came out was not the manager. He was perhaps 60 years old, tall and well-built with the kind of face that had been through enough to produce the specific quality of settled authority that comes from decades of navigating serious situations with integrity. He was wearing clothes that were not showy but were the clothes of someone who did not have to think about what he was wearing because the decision had been made long ago at a level that did not require daily attention. He came out through the door and he stopped on the pavement and he looked at Emeka with the direct attention of someone who has already decided what they are going to do and is simply completing the action. He said he had seen what had happened inside. Emeka said yes. The man said he had also been seated at the corner table when the woman came to the counter and he had watched it from beginning to end. Emeka said yes. The man said he thought what had happened was wrong. Emeka said he appreciated the man saying so. The man said he wanted to do something about it. Emeka said he was fine. The man said he was not asking whether Emeka was fine. He said he was asking whether Emeka was hungry. The directness of the question produced in Emeka the specific response that direct honest questions produce when they arrive at the exact right moment, which was the collapse of the managed presentation and the arrival of the actual truth. He said yes. He said he was hungry. The man said then come with me. He said he knew a place better than this one. He said it was 3 streets away and the food was excellent and he was buying. Emeka looked at him. The man looked back at him with the level directness of someone who is not performing generosity but simply acting on a decision that has been made and is now being executed. Emeka said thank you. The man said come on then. Now friends, I need to stop here because if you are watching this and something has just shifted in your chest, you are exactly where Bishop Tales wants you to be. Please like this video right now and drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever been made to feel that you did not belong in a space because of what you looked like or what you were wearing? And has a stranger ever stood up for you when it mattered? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now, because what happens between these two men in the restaurant 3 streets away is going to change everything you thought this story was about. They walked 3 streets and turned onto a quieter road where a small restaurant occupied the ground floor of an old building with a hand-painted sign above the door that said Mama Caro's in letters that had been applied with care rather than precision. The restaurant inside was small and warm and full of the specific smell of food being cooked properly, not the performed smell of a kitchen that wants you to notice it, but the honest smell of a kitchen that is focused on the cooking and not on the impression. There were perhaps 10 tables, half of them occupied, and the people at the tables had the quality of regulars, people who were there not because the space communicated something they wanted to be associated with, but because the food was consistently good and the environment was consistently honest. A woman in her late 50s, who was evidently Mama Caro herself, greeted the man by name as they came in. He said he had a guest. She looked at Emeka and said welcome and led them to a table near the window. They sat. The man said his name was Biodun Adekunle. Emeka said his name was Emeka Udo. They shook hands across the table with the specific quality of two people who are in an unusual situation and are choosing to navigate it with mutual respect rather than with the awkwardness that the situation's unusualness might have produced. Biodun said, "Order what you want." He said Mama Caro's jollof was the best in this part of Lagos. He said the pepper soup was the best in the city. He said this was not an exaggeration. Emeka said he would take the jollof. Biodun said he would too. He called the order in and sat back and looked at Emeka with the direct and unhurried attention of someone who has decided to actually know the person they are sitting across from. He asked Emeka what he did. Emeka said he was an accountant. He said he had been between positions for 4 months. He said this morning had been an interview he had not been able to attend because of a bus that had arrived late and an alarm that had not gone off. He said it with the specific flatness of someone reporting a fact they have processed and put in the right place rather than someone who is performing the processing in front of an audience. Biodun listened to this and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "What kind of accounting?" Emeka said he had been in logistics finance, accounts payable and receivable, reconciliation, basic financial reporting. He said his qualification was a professional accounting certificate and he had been working toward the next level of the qualification in the evenings before the redundancy. Biodun said how close was he to the next level. Emeka said 3 months of study from the examination. He said he had paused the study because the examination fee was a cost that had been redirected to more immediate needs during the 4 months. Biodun said yes. He said that made sense. He asked what Emeka was looking for in the next position. Emeka said he was looking for something stable in a company where the finance function was taken seriously and where there was room to develop. He said the logistics company had been a good start, but the finance function had been under-resourced relative to the size of the operation, and he had learned a great deal from the gap between what was available and what was needed, and he wanted to be somewhere where what was available matched what was needed so he could build properly rather than improvise constantly. Biodun sat with this for a moment. The food arrived, 2 plates of jollof rice with the specific quality of jollof that has been made by someone who understands rice, which is to say it was the real thing rather than a version of it. They ate. Biodun asked questions between the eating and Emeka answered them, questions about what he had specifically done at the logistics company and what problems he had identified and what he had done about the identifying of them and what the results had been. Emeka answered with the specific detail of someone who is accustomed to being asked questions designed to assess rather than to know and who is answering for the knowing rather than the assessing because the conversation had established itself as honest and therefore required honest answers rather than assessed ones. He described a reconciliation process he had redesigned in his second year at the company that had reduced the monthly close time from 12 days to 6. He described a cash flow projection model he had built using tools available within the company's existing software that had given the finance director visibility over a 3-month forward window that had not previously been available. He described a supplier payment prioritization system he had proposed and implemented that had improved the company's supplier relationships measurably while managing the cash position more carefully. He described these things with the quiet confidence of someone who had done them and knew their value and was not performing the knowledge but simply conveying it. Biodun listened to all of it. He asked specific follow-up questions on 2 of the 3 things Emeka described, questions that were the questions of someone who understood what they were asking about rather than questions that were assessing without understanding. At the end of the meal he sat back and was quiet for a moment. Then he said he owned a group of companies. He said the group had operations in logistics, in food processing, and in commercial property. He said the group had a finance function that was currently being restructured because the person who had been heading it had retired 2 months ago, and the restructuring was taking longer than anticipated because finding someone with the right combination of technical competence and practical intelligence was proving more difficult than he had expected. He said he was not offering Emeka a position. He said he was asking whether Emeka would be willing to come in for a conversation with his group financial controller and the HR director and see what came of it. He said no promises. He said an honest conversation. Emeka sat at the table in Mama Karo's restaurant and looked at this man who had come outside after him and said his name was Biodun Adekunle and bought him jollof rice and asked him questions for an hour and said no promises and an honest conversation. He thought about the morning's missed interview. He thought about the pavement. He thought about the manager at the restaurant and the empty counter and the reservation that was not a reservation. He thought about 4 months and 3 weeks until the numbers stopped working. He said yes. He said he would come in for the conversation. Biodun said good. He said how was his schedule this week. Emeka said it was flexible. Biodun said Thursday. He said he would have his assistant send the details. He said could he have Emeka's number. Emeka gave it. Biodun put it in his phone and said he would be in touch that evening with the appointment confirmation. He said one more thing. He said the examination fee for the next level of the accounting qualification, how much was it? Emeka said the amount. Biodun said he would transfer it that evening. Emeka said that was not necessary. Biodun said it was necessary for the following reason, which was that the conversation on Thursday was going to be better if Emeka had resumed his study and was actively working toward the qualification. He said he was not doing it out of charity. He said he was investing in the quality of a conversation he wanted to have. He said Emeka could resume the study this week and they could talk about where he was with it on Thursday. Emeka looked at him. He said he understood. He said thank you. Biodun said let us see what Thursday produces. They left Mama Karo's together and Biodun stopped on the pavement and looked at the restaurant 3 streets away and said he would be having a conversation with the management of that restaurant. He said not because it would change what had happened but because patterns of behavior in public establishments were patterns that required addressing or they continued and the continuing was not acceptable. He said it with the even voice of someone who has decided on an action and is not requiring an audience's approval for it. Emeka said he appreciated it. He said what had happened had not been the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He said the worst thing was the specific normalization of it, the fact that it had not surprised him, that he had known what was being communicated even as it was being communicated in the language of reserved seating and expected reservations. He said that was the part that stayed with you. Biodun said yes. He said that was exactly the part. He said he had been in situations like that himself and what he had done with the experience was to build something that employed 500 people and to spend his career making decisions that were based on what people were capable of rather than what they looked like or where they came from or what kind of bag they were carrying. He said it was the only response available that was worth making. Emeka looked at him. He said yes. He said he thought that was right. The confirmation came that evening as Biodun had said it would. The examination fee transfer came 15 minutes before the confirmation, also as Biodun had said it would. Emeka transferred the fee to the examination body's account immediately and received the confirmation of his examination registration before he went to sleep. He resumed the study materials that he had put aside 2 months ago with the specific quality of someone returning to something they have missed and that receives them with the consistency of things that do not change while you are away from them because they are built from things that do not change. He studied for 2 days before the Thursday meeting and the studying was its own restoration, the specific restoration of someone who has returned to the territory that their mind recognizes as its natural habitat. He went to the meeting on Thursday. He wore the same professional clothes, clean and pressed, and he carried the same bag. He went to the address Biodun's assistant had sent and it was a proper office building in the commercial district and the reception desk was efficient and the meeting had been arranged and he was shown to a conference room where the group financial controller and the HR director were waiting. He sat across from them and he answered their questions with the same honest specificity with which he had answered Biodun's questions at Mama Karo's, the questions about what he had done and how and what it had produced and what he had learned from what it had not produced. He was in the room for an hour and a half. The questions became more specific as the meeting progressed in the way that questions become more specific when the people asking them are moving from general assessment to detailed assessment because the general assessment has already been satisfactorily completed. At the end of the meeting the financial controller said she would be in touch. She said this with the specific quality of "I will be in touch" that was different from the "I will be in touch" of someone who meant the standard meaning of the phrase, which was a polite close to an interaction that had produced nothing definitive. She said it with the quality of someone who had reached a conclusion and was going to implement it through the appropriate process. Emeka thanked them. He went home. The call came the following Tuesday. The offer was for a position in the group's finance function at a level above what he had held at the logistics company, which reflected both the assessment of his capability and the acknowledgement that the group's finance function was in a state of restructuring that required someone whose range was broader than an entry-level appointment. The salary was significantly more than he had been earning at the logistics company. The benefits were complete. The start date was 2 weeks away. He said he would confirm by the end of the day. He ended the call. He sat in his apartment in the specific quality of silence that follows the arrival of something you have been working toward for 4 months and that had arrived through a pavement outside a restaurant rather than through the 11 interviews and 3 final rounds and 1 missed alarm and 1 late bus that had preceded it. He called his mother. She answered on the second ring. He said he had news. She said good news or bad news. He said good news. She made the sound that his mother made when good news arrived after a period during which good news had not been arriving, a sound that was both relief and prayer and the specific gratitude of someone who had been holding the worry quietly because the holding was her contribution to the situation. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she knew it would come. He said he knew she had known. She said she had been praying every morning. He said he knew. She said tell me about the man. He told her about Biodun. About the restaurant and the pavement and the 3 streets and Mama Caro's and the jollof rice and the questions and Thursday. She listened to all of it. Then she said some people are sent. He said what do you mean? She said some people in your life are sent to you at the specific moment when the specific thing they carry is the thing you need. She said they do not always announce themselves. She said sometimes they announce themselves by coming through a restaurant door onto a pavement. He said yes. He said he thought that was right. He started the position 2 weeks later. He came in on the first morning with the full attention and the full preparation that he brought to things that deserved it, which was everything, and he addressed the work from the first day with the specific quality that the financial controller had identified in the Thursday meeting and that the logistics company's finance director had identified before the redundancy and that Biodun had identified over jollof rice at Mama Caro's, the quality of someone who saw the full picture of what was in front of them and understood what it required and applied themselves to the requirement with thoroughness and with intelligence. Within the first month he had identified 3 areas in the group's financial reporting that were producing data that was technically accurate and practically insufficient, sufficient to pass an audit but insufficient to give management the visibility they needed for the decisions they were making. He did not announce the identification. He built the solutions and presented them to the financial controller with the documentation of what he had found and what he had built and why it addressed what he had found. She reviewed everything and said yes to all 3. She told Biodun at their monthly review. Biodun said he had expected something like this. She said she had too. She said it was still satisfying when the expectation was confirmed. He said yes. He said it was always satisfying. Emeka completed the accounting qualification examination 4 months after starting the position. He passed. He received the result on a Thursday morning and forwarded it to the financial controller and to Biodun with a brief note saying he had completed the next level and was grateful for the support that had made resuming the study possible when he had resumed it. Biodun replied with 3 words. I expected it. Emeka looked at the 3 words for a moment. He thought about the pavement. He thought about Mama Caro's. He thought about the questions over jollof rice and the specific directness of someone who was asking to know rather than to assess. He thought about what it meant to be expected. Not to be tested and found sufficient. To be expected. He thought that being expected was a different thing from being assessed and that the difference was one of the most important differences available. To be tested was to be doubted until evidence accumulated. To be expected was to be believed before the evidence, which was a form of investment that changed what the invested in person was capable of because the believing came before the doing and the believing was itself the thing that made certain kinds of doing possible. He thought about the manager at the restaurant. He thought about the specific calculus of her rapid assessment, the 30 seconds in which she had looked at him and reached a conclusion about whether he belonged in her space. He thought about the conclusion she had reached and what it had been based on and what it had not been based on. He thought about Bio Dunn sitting in the corner table and watching and making a different assessment based on different criteria and coming outside and acting on what the different assessment produced. He thought about the difference between those two assessments and what the difference said about what made an assessment reliable and what made it wrong, and the specific cost of wrong assessments when the person bearing the cost was someone whose bag had seen better years and whose professional clothes had been worn frequently during a 4-month period when replacing them had not been financially possible. He thought about all of this with the honest attention he brought to things that mattered, and he thought about what he was going to do with the thinking. He was a year into the position at the group before the thing he was going to do with it became clear enough to act on. What it became clear to him was an initiative. He had discussed it with Bio Dunn, not as a request but as a proposal, a full and specific proposal with a structure and a purpose and an implementation plan. The proposal was for the group to partner with a professional accounting body to fund examination fees for candidates from lower income backgrounds who had completed their study but were being held at the examination stage by the specific barrier of the examination fee, the same barrier he had been held at for 2 months during the redundancy period. He proposed that the partnership be named not after the group but after the principle, and the principle he proposed naming it after was the principle of the pavement, the principle that the most important thing a person with resources could do when they encountered someone without them was to stop and see what they actually needed and provide the specific thing that would make the next thing possible. He proposed calling it the Next Thing Initiative. Bio Dunn read the proposal. He sat with it. He said yes. He said, "When do you want to start?" Emeka said he wanted to start immediately. Bio Dunn said of course he did. He said implement it. The first cohort of the initiative was 12 candidates. 8 of them passed their examinations and went on to positions in the formal financial sector. The second cohort was 20 candidates. The partnership was extended to include a second professional body and a third corporate partner. By the third year the initiative had supported 114 candidates and had a pass rate that was above the national average for the examination, which the academic coordinator of the initiative attributed to the specific quality of candidates who had already completed the study and were being held only by the fee barrier rather than by any gap in their preparation, which was exactly what Emeka had said when he wrote the proposal. He went back to Mama Caro's on the second anniversary of the afternoon Bio Dunn had brought him there. He went alone, in the middle of the day, and he sat at the table near the window where they had sat, and he ordered the jollof rice and he ate it slowly in the way of someone who is eating with full attention to the meal and to what the meal represents. Mama Caro herself came to the table when she saw him sitting there and said she remembered him. He said he was glad she remembered. She said she remembered because Bio Dunn had told her about him. She said Bio Dunn came in regularly and had told her about the afternoon and what had happened after it. She said he talked about Emeka the way he talked about things he was proud of. Emeka looked at her. He said the jollof was still the best in this part of Lagos. She said yes. She said she knew. He said he was going to bring his team here for lunch next month. She said she would be ready for them. He said he knew she would. On his way out he stopped at the door and looked back at the table near the window and thought about the afternoon 2 years ago and the pavement and the man who had come outside and said he had seen what had happened and it was wrong and he knew a better place 3 streets away. He thought about what 3 streets had contained. He thought about jollof rice and questions asked to know and examination fees transferred as an investment in a conversation and a Thursday meeting and a phone call on a Tuesday and a position and a qualification and an initiative and 114 candidates and 8 of the 12 and 20 of the next and every person who was going to come after them because a man had sat in a corner table and watched what was happening at a restaurant counter and had decided it required a response and had gotten up and come outside. He thought about what it meant that the response had been 3 streets and a meal and questions about what he had actually done and honest listening and no promises. He thought about the simplicity of it. He thought about how much had been built on the simplicity of it. He thought about his mother saying some people are sent. He thought that whether or not people were sent, the thing that made the difference was not the sending but the responding. The responding was the choice. The responding was always the choice. And the responding had changed everything. He went out through the door. The street was doing what the street always did. He walked in the direction of his office 3 streets and several years away from the pavement where he had stood with 140 naira and an empty afternoon and a hunger that had been his most consistent companion for a day that had produced nothing useful. He walked with the specific quality of someone who is fully in their own life and who understands what it took to get there and who has decided that the understanding is not a private possession but a public responsibility and who is doing something about that decision every day. He walked. The city moved around him. Everything had changed. It had all started with a man at a corner table deciding that what he was watching required a response. The response had been everything. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this: has a stranger ever stood up for you or stopped to help you when you needed it most? And have you ever been that stranger for someone else? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. There are many more stories coming and they go deeper than this one every time. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.